A conversation with Kayla Van Der Heyden by Zoey from Finding North Network. You're about to watch Zoey and Kayla Van Der Heyden discuss topics related to mental health experiences. If you have questions, please reach out to info@findingnorthnetwork.com.au.
Thinking of topics of reflection, I have a few questions for you. So I'd like to ask you, what does mental illness mean for you? Do you align with those words? Tell me more.
Thanks, Zoe. Thank you so much. So when I think of the term mental illness, it used to align for me. It's definitely changed over the years. Very early on in my recovery journey, I think I was very medicalized before I had access to any form of peer support or knew that it was a thing, or even heard of the term recovery, or thought that someone could even recover from a mental illness. I used to very strongly attach to the term mental illness and think and own and talk and share that I have a mental illness. I used to also really own, share, and talk about my diagnoses. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with this. However, for me, my identity was so strongly around having a mental illness and having these diagnoses that they were me and, you know, a huge part of me. They weren't a part of me. So that's why I think some of my perspectives and reflections have changed. So for me now, when I hear the term mental illness, I think I feel I don't like the word illness. Like, it feels like there's something wrong with you. It doesn't feel like a human experience. And I think mental illness is a human experience in my perspectives. I think I prefer mental distress or mental health challenges. They feel a little bit more friendly than the term mental illness. Illness seems like something you've got to cure or get rid of, or like something's wrong with you. And I think that's where we go wrong.
I love that. And the thing I love about having these conversations is understanding why people have different preferences for terminologies and words, and even just the awareness that you can actually align or not align with particular words. And I think that's what's most refreshing. You talked about, diagnoses and grief and loss. Can you tell me more about that, and what does that mean for you now?
Absolutely. So yeah, I think the very first time I got a diagnosis, I told everyone, and there was nothing wrong with that. I think it breaks down stigma and it means I own what's happening for me. Oh, you can see Autumn in the background. A little pink coat on today. She's very cold. Anyway, yeah, so diagnoses, okay, ADHD brain. Yeah, I thought that this is it. It's just like, I don't know what I thought actually, because if we think of physical health, if we think of cancer, if we think of a broken leg, if we think of a head injury, we can recover from all of these things. Yes, they may be terminal, but we can actually recover from all of these things. But for whatever reason, when I first got my very first diagnosis, I didn't think I could recover. I never heard of the term recovery. It wasn't shared with me for a very long time. And I also thought that it stays. When you get given a diagnosis, it stays, like sort of like the year that you were born or a birthmark you were given. I thought that it was, or like a tattoo, I thought that it was permanent. And that's where my sort of shift around diagnosis started like changing, because I had worked in the peer workforce for some time and I started sharing diagnoses, and then 2 years later, I'm bumping across these people. I don't have those diagnoses or those labels anymore. I've either recovered from them or they were incorrect, they've changed. Through all different reasons. So mine have changed over time, or I have recovered from some. So the ones now that I have, I guess the reason I don't share is because this isn't a space where I'm sharing in an open room. It's an online platform. For all I know, I'm going to recover from these, or they're going to change again, and they're just not that important. I guess it's like a hair color that can change. They're really not that important for me. So that's what I think about diagnoses. I also think they can hold a lot of power. For me, medically, I see how they are important because we do have the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, and that's where the different diagnoses are. Now, for me to have given the right treatment, and I do mean medical treatment, it's a lot of treatment for recovery that I've accessed, but for my medical treatment and for my medication, it is important for me to have some sort of a label or a diagnosis, I guess the same way with like a head injury or a broken leg, so that I could get access to the right treatment. So in that way, it was very purposeful. And for me to also learn about it, educate myself about it, and make sense of it and work within my symptoms and that kind of a thing. However, we're all unique. It's not like a handbook of this is this label and this is exactly what it means. So in that sort of aspect, I like to just call them human experiences. I occasionally will choose to share diagnoses, particularly in the peer workforce, or with close family and friends. Some days I'm like really comfortable and other days I'm just not. So it's really different, but I don't think much about diagnoses. I think they're more labels. And I think for me, when I had received a diagnosis, there was a lot of grief and loss. I lost my identity. I lost who I was. And it was a really tough time. So now I've had the privilege of regaining all of that I don't care too much for this label. And I think it's quite a privilege that I can feel and say this way now, because that never used to be the case.
I love that. Can you tell me more about what you mean by losing your identity with the diagnosis that you've received?
Absolutely. I think what I mean by that is I lost who I was. I forgot who I was before having these tough human experiences. I lost who I was as a person, all those things that I've listed about me, that I'm a mum, that I like craft, that I've got a dog, where I was born, my family origin, my gender identity, all of those great things that make me up to be me, they weren't relevant anymore. It was just, I'm Kayla and this is my diagnosis. And that's the way I lived. And it's not a nice way to live.
So Kayla, just going back to your sharing your diagnosis, I guess a big part of it is stigma. What are your thoughts of internal and external stigma?
Yeah, I think for me, I have personally experienced internal stigma so much greatly than external. I felt like when I received a diagnosis that it was literally like tattooed on my forehead. Like everybody could see it. If I was to walk down the street, everyone would be able to see me as this is what's wrong with her, or this is what's happening for her. And it was evident to everybody. So I needed to use that diagnosis or that label to tell people first before they could see, and really explain this is who I am and this is what I have. Where that wasn't the case, it's like, for me, it's actually invisible. What I've come to know is that nobody has been able to see what's happening for me 90% of the time. And that is my own internal stigma and thoughts, that everybody can see what's happening for me. And I've been very hard on myself. And I think that's what it can be like with mental health experiences, diagnoses, and stigma. And for me, external stigma it's definitely still very real through media, songs that I hear on the radio, everyday language, I think, has a long way to go. However, someone judging me over having sort of mental health experiences, I haven't really had that. However, I have had, I think, people that aren't really educated with mental health challenges or experiences and don't have the awareness, the understanding, and the right language, but it hasn't been anything malicious or purposeful or out to get me kind of thing. I think it's just been humans that don't understand. And Yeah, and that I take much more lightly than my own sort of self-judging, and worry of what everybody thinks. So yeah.
And what's that like now that you've started and am on your amazing journey through recovery and having your amazing in life at the moment? How's that internal stigma?
It's so good because it's just not there. Um,
Yes.
yeah, it's amazing. It's just not there. And yeah, like, and what I mean by it's just not there is that I'm just so kind to myself now. If I have a bad day or a hard time or I'm experiencing distress or any of these things, it really just is a human experience and it can be related to my diagnosis or it could not. But for me, recovery, it's been like, well, I've been here before. I know the gig. I know what to do. Come on, let's get the toolbox out again. And it's just so much easier to tackle and to work through. I don't really care what others think when they see me, whether I'm going good or not doing well. It's just, well, this is my experience. And, I have a lot more trust in those around me, and humanity that, that most of the population is really, are really kind, understanding people. And if people don't understand, it doesn't mean they're not kind. I don't have that worry anymore. Certainly isn't any type of label tattooed on my forehead. I can see that very clearly now. And yeah, for me, labels like they can have a purpose or they cannot. That stigma just like isn't there. So that's really great. I think we still face some, external stigma within the world, and we have like, quite some place to come there. But I also don't judge that either. I think we're all humans, we're all learning, we're all in this together. And what you don't know, you just don't know.
Absolutely. I love that. It's, so much of it, it's really human experiences. And my last question for you is lived versus living experience. Like there's so much out there at the moment in this space. Tell me, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. The term lived experience, I have heard a lot within sort of the PR or the lived experience workforce. That's how I originally heard of it. And it sort of guides the way that we work through our experiences. And it's one of the sort of it's listed on job titles and things like that. It's a way that we can own some of our experiences, and I'm finding it very interesting. I'm at no means an expert in anything I say or an academic or anything, so these are just my perspectives. But for me, until we have a greater understanding of lived and living experience, I like to go and use both because for me, lived experiences are things that I've absolutely worked through, like have worked through and might not even exist anymore. They're not relevant. They're a past part of my experience or my story, but they haven't been relevant for like years and some time. They're also, for me, a lived experience is something that's happened, been and gone. And for me, when I say the reason I'm not always comfortable just saying, hey, I work as a PR or, as whatever, and I've got a lived experience is because I don't want anyone to have the impression or the idea that recovery has this end goal and that it means that that was a past experience. It's no longer relevant now. And although part of that might be the case, I think for me, the reason I like jumping between the two and saying lived and living experience is because I still do have human experiences. I still do have challenges. I still do have like really tough days. And that doesn't mean that I'm not in recovery or that I'm not well. It's a human experience. So for me, I say living experience to prove that, hey, I can actually still work and I can still be a mum and I can still do all the things I enjoy, but I have these experiences too and be in recovery. So I think that's what it currently means for me. But I'm interested to watch this space as, this particular field expands and to see what comes of it.
I love it. And I think because our this, the lived experience space is continuously growing and evolving. Everything changes, and it's just so good and amazing to watch how it's, everything that's panning out at the moment. So I guess, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much. It's been so amazing to listen to your story, the way that you've shared it, your perspective, and your wonderful autumn at the back. It's such a wonderful experience. So on behalf of Finding North Network, I'd like to thank you, say a big thank you, and we really appreciate this and you sharing your story with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Zoey. And yeah, thank you everybody for listening as well.
Thank you for watching. To join more conversations like this one or to share your own journey, please contact info@findingnorthnetwork.com.au.